Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Authentic Sound podcast. And while Stefan is waving at the listeners or the viewers who watch this audio podcast or video podcast, we are going to talk about something really exciting. We prepared like an awesome episode for you. We're going to talk about maybe the first episode. There might be more episodes about durations, concert durations. And now you may ask, like, what is concert durations, why it's important for tempo reconstruction? Well, we are going to talk about that in a second. Why it's important? Well, it's important on itself because it's an interesting subject, but also it's one of these topics that are used and used again and again as kind of to debunk the existence of whole beat metronome practice. You know, whole beat metronome practice, the WBMP. We take 2 ticks for 1. So metronome marks in the 19th century, you take the 1 and 2, so 2 clicks for 1 for actually the duration of the note value. And then you arrive, of course, to much slower tempos of music that we know very well, but it's more digestible, playable, and we think also more enjoyable and also historically correct. That's, of course, something that the book is about. Is going to tell you more details about. When it appears, I have to say I'm working really hard on finishing the manuscript and it's going to be good. But in this episode, we're going to focus on these durations and we're going to highlight the 1808 concert. What's that? Well, that's the most famous concert perhaps that's ever given on this planet Earth by Mr. Beethoven himself. He was presenting, among other works, his Fifth and his Sixth Symphonies. So that concert is pretty well documented. So we're going to take this as an example. Maybe, as I said, the first example, because there is a lot to say about concert durations and historical durations in combination with metronome marks, but we will not be able to cover everything in this episode. So there you have it. That's the introduction. And now I will say hello to Stefan. And of course, my question, did I miss anything in the introduction?
Probably a lot, but just kidding. I mean, you said that this is going to be an awesome podcast. I think every episode we record is awesome. No, just kidding. But we enjoy our time, and that's the most important thing. And we hope that the listeners enjoy listening to us as well, or watching us in case. And if you guys want to see me wave at the camera at the beginning of every episode, probably not every, because in the older episodes I didn't do it, but in all the newly recorded episodes, just
head over to Substack. There's a subscription button. You can just support the work that we do. Or you go over to Patreon. We are pitching ourselves here. There is also a link maybe in the description here. I have to check, but Patreon, that's of course a site. It's an awesome community, and then you can support also the research that we're doing and everything else. So
yeah, and if you want to listen more to the two of us talking, if that's something that you want, then head over to Patreon, because we also record some updates there about what is going on behind the scenes and so on and so forth. So yeah, there's a lot going on. But let's maybe start this discussion about concert durations and the 1808 concert with the question, why are durations even relevant? And I mean, just to give one example, a very famous example, and I know we keep coming back to that one, it's Lisitsa commented on one of your videos, Valentina Lisitsa, the very famous pianist. And because you made a video about her Moonlight Sonata, which it actually wasn't really about that. It was about, the one bar that, according to her, you played on time. We discussed already this segment, the last movement of the Moonlight Sonata. I think it was a few episodes ago. You guys will find it. It's probably labeled something understandable and findable. So just go back and listen to that. And she commented that by our logic, the historical concert of December 22nd, 1808 would have lasted 7 hours. Well, she took it back in the comment and said the performance would not last through the first page of any of those scores. The audience used rotten eggs and other things like that instead of today's dislike button. So I couldn't not include the comment in this podcast, and you can go over to Authentic Sound and search for 1808 concert, and you will see the comment yourself, or you can go to the video about the Moonlight Sonata and you will find the comment there. It's buried in a lot of other comments by now, I think. But so it's an interesting question. Like, why are we talking about concert durations in the context of historical tempo reconstruction? And if I can share my perspective and then you can give your professional opinion, it's you're nearly coughed.
I was drinking some water for those who didn't see, and then you made that comment professional. Yeah. And I had to laugh.
You're the professional here. I'm the
Thank you. I have a degree in all of that, of course.
Yeah, you have a degree. I have a degree in something different that we're going to come.
You have a degree. I don't.
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
Just piano playing and organ playing. That's all I have.
You just press some keys at the right point in time. That's it. I can juggle numbers. No, just kidding. Yeah, I mean, if I just take a step back and ask myself the question, I think if you just approach this question logically, if you were to find a letter, a playbill or something where a person described a performance by, let's say, Beethoven, and in that letter the person wrote, yeah, Beethoven played for me his first piano sonata, and it took him about 25 minutes. That should give you an indication of how fast Beethoven played. And again, if you talk just about the two options, which you essentially only have, which is whole beat or single beat, 1 or 2 ticks per note value in the metronome equation, there should be a clear answer to that question. So if it's 30 minutes and in whole beat the sonata takes 30 minutes, well, you have the answer in which tempo he played it. And that's the very simplistic idea of why people assume that these durations are relevant.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I can understand that. I mean, it makes total sense. If you have something and then you say, well, I mean, I think there is also a very famous description about the Hammerklavier sonata that Liszt gave to someone, and he said, yeah, the duration of the performance, maybe that's a separate episode, but I think it's like you're supposed to play it in about an hour. That whole sonata, and that feels very relevant. And it should give us an indication of how it is played. Because again, you are talking about it's either a factor of 1 or 2. So is 30 minutes single beat or is it whole beat? That should give you an indication. But yeah, what's your idea on that?
But that's a very interesting take. I was answering before my turn, like with no. But there is a difference between what Liszt wrote there in this Hammerklavier sonata thing and the example that you mentioned. Like, if you are part of a performance of Beethoven is playing his sonata or whatever. First, you have to know that what sonata he's playing, because nothing is published and nothing. I mean, you have to really imagine the situation. So, but you have that information, and I happen to align to like 30 minutes, for instance. And okay, that's a single beat rendition of a large Beethoven sonata. Fine. Then you make the equation. Beethoven 30-minute, we 30-minute, match single beat is a thing. Then you have to be very sure about a few parameters. First off, what did Beethoven played? Are we sure that he played all the movements? Are we sure that he didn't leave out anything? Are we sure that he did play the repeats? Didn't he? Are we sure that he played that sonata? And are we sure that the 30 minutes are correct? Because you're basing your assumption on something of which you have no secondary confirmation.
In a lot of cases,
in all the cases, we have no double confirmations of durations. Who the things that we have is like, okay, people write in letters, or they have diaries or whatever, or they mention, like in the 808 concert, we will see that, like Reichard saying, like it lasted 4 hours. I mean, exactly 4 hours, like on the second of 4 hours, 15 minutes. How did people count time back then? We are digital people. We count with seconds. I mean, all of that you have to take into account. And so, is it interesting? Absolutely, because there are data on durations. There are that we can use and that we can learn something from. And we're going to talk about that at the end of this podcast as well. What the conclusions could be, as we will see in the 1808 concert reconstruction, how difficult it is, even with maybe the most documented concert that we have, to come to certain conclusions in the connection to metronome marks, because that's what we don't have to forget that. When people talk about durations, in whatever document they do that or whatever context, they refer oftentimes, if not always, to modern performances, and they find a match. That magical match might not be based on the same data, on the same context. What was played? Was the entire program played? Was the program played as announced? Because we know from that time, from more than enough sources and recent studies. I mean, you can read books about concert practice in the 19th century. Just do that. And our book will give also like enough excerpts of those studies to make you aware of the fact that it was not like in our time where you go on internet and you see like the Concertgebouw Amsterdam announces a program and you know exactly what is going to be played, and you come in the program in the concert hall and then there is silence and people play and there is a break and then people play the second there. No, that time you had new music written oftentimes, and very seldomly, very rarely, that music was played in its totality. So when they say Beethoven played his Fifth Symphony, you have no idea what was played. You can be very sure that not the entire thing was played. And even within new movements, and not only composers, but also conductors and musicians, because keep in mind, this is the time where musicians, the virtuosos, the conductors did not compose their own music anymore, but they were starting to play music of others. So you had this something that, like the disconnect between composer and performer. And so the performers had added an own life to that. And there was the expectation of the audience. So a lot of these symphonies were just cut, and not only in movements, but also in like within the movement. There was something that even Beethoven students did. It was like all over the place. So in all of that and much more, I mean, we're not going to talk in super detail here. But if you take that into account, and you come then to your comparison, like I witnessed Beethoven play that sonata, which we still play today, you have no actually relevant reference. You don't know what was exactly played. And then I finished my story with the thing that you said about Liszt. Liszt said explicitly something like, when you play the entire Hammerklavier sonata, it takes you about 1 hour. That's like a theoretical concept. When you do that, based upon his experience, he didn't say like, leave out the middle movement or something like that. It was not like a program in which the Hammerklavier sonata was played. He said, when you play the entire Hammerklavier sonata, it's about 1 hour. That's one of the durations. That's a very, very close to whole beat, because and there's only one repeat in the Hammerklavier sonata. It's the A section of the first movement. So you are pretty sure that when you calculate the duration in whole beat, you arrive like a 1 hour and 5 minutes. Alberto made a recording in 2020, which is 1 hour 20 minutes, because he slowed down in the slow movements. Was like the early time. Just saying that to just say like, okay, that duration, well, that points to whole beat. But the question to you is, Stefan, as a mathematician, why would we take durations in order to reconstruct tempos if we have the metronome marks? Does that make any sense to you?
Well, I think I can understand the urge to go to these durations, because you feel like, from a logical perspective, they give you an answer to the problem.
Because what is the logical explain me that.
It's what I said before. Again, if you find the description, that's the urge that people have. They want to find a description of Beethoven playing his own works, and then if there is a duration attached to that playing, they feel, and I can understand that feeling, that from that duration they will get a grasp on how Beethoven played it. And I mean, the reason they do that is because the metronome marks apparently don't make any sense. And that's something that we will also see if we go through this concrete example of the 1808 concert. The metronome marks are just a way more precise way of describing playing than a concert duration, because you have so many more variables that come into these concert durations. I mean, you laid out a lot of these already. It's repetition, it's pauses, it's did he play the whole thing, or did he just quit in the middle of the movement or something, or did he whatever. There are so many questions, and a lot of these examples will come up in the 1808 concert. And the 1808 concert also has an additional problem, and that problem is there is not just one sonata. as I gave in my example, because I wanted to give an example that makes sense. If you have one sonata, took him 30 minutes, as with the Liszt Hammerklavier thing, that's an interesting thing, because you have Hammerklavier 1 hour. Okay, that's something you can work with. But in the case of the 1808 concert, that's a whole program. That's a whole program with a lot of variables, with some weird sections that you don't know. You have some descriptions here, you have some descriptions there, and that's what makes it so complex. And you guys are going to see it. And it's the very short answer is metronome marks are, simply put, a way more precise indicator of how things were played compared to concert duration.
Yeah, and
concentration are a lot more inaccurate with a lot more variables.
Yeah, and there is an additional element there that's like also for the composer becomes the performer when he performs. And like we don't have a lot of information around Beethoven, of course. The 1808 concert is an exception. We have the Ninth Symphony duration, but that's maybe for another time. That's like incredible. But like the composer who is performing his works becomes a performer, becomes also like part of the audience. He has to answer the audience's expectation as well. And that might be not so a thing for Beethoven in that time, but later for sure. And I can give an example if you want. But the point that I want to make here is now when the composer gives the metronome marks, he does that in the seclusion of his working room, of his workroom, his study room. Mm-hmm. He has his piano, he has his metronome, and he is working on his work, on his composition with a metronome until he finds what is, according to him, the ideal tempo. There are no circumstances. If you are like a pianist in the 19th century and you compose a beautiful nocturne and you play it in front of an audience, you might be nervous. And what happens when you're nervous? You tend to speed up and things like that. So it's still interesting. And I'm not downplaying the data that we can subtract from that particular concert, especially not when we are sure about what is played at 100% level. But still, the performer performing his own works in the most ideal situation, that should be very close to his metronome mark, by the way. But still, the metronome mark is when he performed the piece in like the relaxed environment of his study room. That was considered also in the 19th century. And there are a lot of quotes that confirm that has actually done that, where we can think like, okay, but that's the ideal tempo of the composer. And as you said very clearly, and I want to underline that, the reason why this is brought up in the context of our research on metronome marks, and especially the introduction of the WBMP. I mean, we didn't introduce that, but we might have brought it to a larger scale than before. But the reason that people bring this up is because they don't want to accept the existence of the WBMP. They have difficulties with the fact that there is no escape. In a sense, when you look at metronomizations of the 19th century as a totality, and you consider like tens of thousands of metronome marks, I don't know if we will arrive to that many in our database once, but there are a lot of metronome marks, and it's just an assumption now. But if you say like, okay, but 60% of that is just flat out impossible, and it's like too ridiculous to even start talking about that. When you consider that element, well, then you have a very difficult decision to make, because what you said rightfully at the beginning, like a metronome mark, your metronome, you can just use it in two ways. That's how we do it today. That's we call single beat, or as many physicists are still using it today, like you have the back and forth as one. There are no more possibilities than that. And if you have such overwhelming data on metronome marks that you say this is absolutely ludicrous to even talk about that, in the sense of like people were really serious about this, well, then only the WMP is there. And so that's the context and the drive actually for many people today to go to the durations. Because if you have if you zoom out, like you have a bird's eye over the durations, and you very generically compare them with modern performances, as we said, then magically you can connect the dots. And of course, we're going to zoom in on one of these excerpts of these concerts, and then you see that the dots are not so easily to be connected. But many people today, Stefan, and I'm saying this with all respect to everybody, are not interested in reconstructing the past. They are interested in keeping the status quo. And for that durations, we have to dismantle that. And in the book, they will be dismantled. That is like a major chapter in the first part. We have to do that, but they are absolutely not relevant to understand the idea of the composer. For that, we have the metronome marks. The metronome marks are absolutely above and above any durations data that we have, because they are absolute, checked, controlled, double checked, because they're published, and so on and so on. They're republished. They're republished by students, by editors, and so on. We have a confirmation throughout the entire 19th century that these metronome marks were just solid tempos of the composer. Why is that important? Well, you change that and you change the entire composition. Can be good.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to do that. But that's our goal, of course, to reconstruct the idea of the composer. What did Beethoven hear in his mind when he wrote the first notes of the Fifth Symphony? I mean, that's super interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and therefore, I think that's a complete answer. And we will dive into this the 1808 concert right now, I think, and to highlight the complexity of it.
Yeah, that's why we make this podcast, and this is the first episode ever that we make about durations, and therefore we wanted to take the most famous example and go through it in detail. And now you heard why we think that durations are problematic, and we will show you also in that concrete example why it is really problematic to take these durations as a proof for anything in the way I gave the example in my introduction. It's like, it's not that simple that you say, yeah, it was 30 minutes and the first sonata in whole beat is 30 minutes, so it's whole beat or in single beat. No, it's not that simple. And that's why we want to go through one example. And what we also want to do in the future, not saying that it's necessarily going to be the next episode, is that we want to talk about durations more in general, because there is also a infamous document that is circling around the internet by a certain Fafner 1988 at gmail.com. Sorry to name the email address, but that's the only name by which he is known, because he wanted to remain anonymous, and he wanted to take down the whole beat metronome practice by using durations. And that's an important document, and we want to just discuss it in an extra episode. So just to highlight that idea before we dive into the 1808 concert. And now I think is the time that we start with exactly that. So maybe as a little bit of an introduction, Wim, in your storytelling way of how you make your YouTube videos and also the 1808 concert video, give us a little bit of an introduction. Like, what are we talking about? 1808, that's a year? Okay, is it like winter, summer? Where are we? Just give us a little bit of an introduction. Like, where are we joining our friend Beethoven in Vienna, I think? But go ahead.
Well, it's 22nd of December, 1808.
So it's not summer, sadly.
Not summer. No, you have to. I'm not a specialist, but you can read about that. So you have to imagine in that time. We cannot imagine that anymore. But if we think about Beethoven, when Beethoven would live today and he would even snap with his fingers, he would have a symphonic orchestra and a major concert hall ready for him. Like, yeah. Mr. Beethoven, we are here for your new symphony. In that time, it was different. Vienna was all about opera. And so opera. So composers had to fight, certainly for the larger works that they wanted to present, for a little spot in the few concert halls that there were. And so there was an orchestra that had they had to work with, and so on. And so Beethoven was given, after months and months, I mean, he was desperately looking for one evening that he could present his new works. Was the 22nd of December was given to him, like the most unfortunate date you can imagine, because at that evening you had 50% of the orchestra that was like playing in another venue, because they were obliged to take part in a concert for the to generate revenue for widows of deceased musicians at another place. So Beethoven had his concert hall, but he lost half of his orchestra.
Whoops.
And don't think about it like the Berlin Symphoniker Orchestra. That was just like an orchestra in that time. People worked for an opera house or a concert house, but I mean, the majority were just amateurs. They had another job.
Yeah, they probably didn't practice 8 hours a day and for months to just prepare one concert like the modern concerts that we have, right?
Not to give you an example, like Beethoven had to find 50% of his orchestra people came from the army, and just people from the street, and so the Fifth Symphony was documented. The ink was still wet, so you have to imagine this. The Sixth Symphony was given, I think, in the morning to the orchestra. They barely had a rehearsal, if all. The Fifth Symphony, they've never played before. So the orchestra's there, they see the notes for the first time, and they're greeting their colleagues because they don't know each other either. And then you have a composer, Beethoven still was able to hear at that time, but not like the most flexible conductor, I would say, because he had also in that program like a beautiful song, which he wanted to have sung by a famous soprano, but she didn't want to sing with him because she didn't like the way he was handling her. So he had to find, and there was an amateur who was singing. So the entire context of the 1808 concert, which lasted like 4 hours, if we believe Reichhardt, and we're going to talk about him in a second, was like unbelievably difficult. In the book, I will compare it to Herbert von Karajan, the famous conductor of the Berliner Symphoniker, who recorded famously in the 60s, like the 9 symphonies. They hired a church 6 months to practice that music. And you talk about the Berliner film. I mean, every musician in that symphony orchestra, by the time they started rehearsing, knew all the notes of the symphonies for at least 30 years, I think, on average, by heart. And yet they worked 6 months. And still, von Karajan performance is way slower than the metronome marks. Not so for Beethoven in 1808. In that concert hall, it was freezing in the hall, was documented. But Reichhardt, an important composer in that time, very famous musician, he was an important musician, he documented in his diary, everything was played very fine. If only from the context. How can you reconcile that with a single beat environment where we today are not even able to play those pieces in single beat?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds absolutely insane to even start comparing. And that's why I wanted you to give that introduction, because it's not an argument per se, but it's about making clear of the context that this concert has been played and performed in. And it's just unimaginable for us these days to have a concert under these circumstances. And that's also something that we have to keep in mind a lot with that. Just because concerts of classical music are performed these days, like you go to the concert hall, you sit down, you shut up, and even if someone coughs, it's annoying. And I know that every concert I went to, there's at least one ancient person opening up like a bonbon or something, it's just crackling all through the hall. It's just that's every time. It just keeps being annoying as hell.
If you like this podcast, the beginning of this podcast, and you want to listen to the full episode, go over to Substack. There's a link in the description box. Subscribe to Substack, because then you have the full audio version of this podcast. If you want to have the video version, there's also a possibility on Substack to subscribe for $5 per month, or you can have also the video podcast and support the entire project on our Patreon site. Links to all of these platforms below. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. We see each other very soon again. Bye.